Hello and welcome. In this particular talk, it's the second of the introductory Android talks. We're going to have a little look at an activity that involves a fragment, and to say, well, why do we have fragments? What is the relationship of them? And we'll also explore how we can, within our Java code, start to control and to have some control over what is displayed and put in some interaction within it. Again, it's going to be fairly heavy on concepts and fairly light in terms of actual meaningful, useful programming. But nonetheless, it's important to establish all these different concepts because they underpin certainly most, if not all, of Android development. So we'll have a little look first of all then at fragments. Now we want to create an app with fragments within it. So we're going to create a new, so my second game, and we will, similar to last time, we'll give it a meaningful ac.qub /CS, my second game. Again, similar to last time, we'll just simplify ourselves, and we're building for the same version. It should be at least as high as the minimum. That is fine. Let's do next. We'll create a custom launcher and create an activity. We're happy with the launcher. Now, create an activity. We want to create one with a fragment. As mentioned before, best way to think about fragments are that they are sort of screens of information, bits of an activity. Activities themselves should be fairly meaty. They should be fairly substantial. And any intervening steps within them, we really want to define those as a fragment. It's a somewhat arbitrary distinction between the two, so you can draw that line wherever you want. Fragments they weren't in Android at the very start, so activities were used for everything. But they're fairly cumbersome things to use, so fragments came in as a more efficient way of actually managing the processes. So let's have a look. We'll create a blank activity with a fragment. You get to name the layout that the fragment has. The default will do, and we'll hit finish. So it has now created our project with the fragment as part of it. If we were to run this, it runs an Android application, and bring up our emulator. So it's launching it. You'll see it comes up with a hello world. So it's exactly the same functionality as the one that we had before. So what is the difference? In terms of the source, we still only have one source file. We will want to change that because I don't particularly like the way they do this. They put in a static class within this, a placement holder for holding the fragment. And we have two layout files now in terms of our XML. So one is our activity main, similar one that we had before, but this looks a little bit slender, a little bit more slim, and if we actually view it, nothing's displayed on the screen. And our fragment main, if we were to display that, we get our hello world. So apparently the only meaningful difference is that we have chopped up our user interface, the XML description, into two bits, one a frame layout, and the second one a fragment layout, which is relative layout that contains the text view, pulling in our hello world string. Now, there's an important distinction. Inside the activity, and if you were to create an activity without a fragment, you wouldn't have this. But here we have an important attribute that we're saying that we've got an Android ID, and it is a resource. The plus actually means we are adding it in, so it's a new resource. It's a new ID called container. Why do we have this? We have this because within our code down here, we are referring to and accessing the fragment and the different actions of it. So it gives us a way of getting access to, for example, in this case, the container. And we go into our generated file. So this is, remember, the one that's auto-generated. Go down to the IDs. We will see that we have a container being generated down there. And that's the one that comes from here. If I were to say container 2, which is not a sensible name, and to save it, so I want to call this frame layout to give it an ID called container 2. Again, to my resources, it's now called container 2. So we do that for anything that we want to identify or to refer to within the code. So for example, our text view, if we wanted to access the text view within the code, so we want to get it, to manipulate it, or to query something about it, we would need to give it a particular ID, which will enable us to do that. So we're referring to it, we're giving it a new ID, and we'll call it, text view. That's not really a very sensible ID name, but it'll do. If I save this and go into our resources, we now have one called text view. And what that means is that through our code, we can access the text view whenever we want to. So that's quite an important bit. Anything that we want to access within our code, we've got to give it an ID, and we can do that using this particular attribute, adding in an ID, and giving it a particular name. So let's have a look at the code itself. Now, as before, we've got onCreate options menu, onCreate items, or options item selected. I'm not using the menu, we can take that out. So this is our code here. It's not really much more than it was before. We're still setting the content view to be whatever we've contained within that activity main XML layout file. And we're then saying, okay, do we have a save instance state? Now, when we're running and creating the app, we're not. It's going to be the first time it's been done. There isn't going to be any save state that we're worried about. If that's the case, and it will be the case first time we do it, we then have a little sequence here. So we're getting a Fragment Manager, we're beginning a transaction, and we're adding in to this particular container, and that there, remember, is the ID for the activities layout, a new placement fragment, and committing that. Now, that's the bit that adds in the fragment. If I were to comment that out and run it, so we deploy it, it'll fire up. The hello world is missing because we are displaying our activity, and the activity just displayed an empty frame. Because we haven't added in the fragment, we're not adding in its particular text view. So functionally, the whole purpose of this particular bit is simply to add in the fragment, nothing more than that. But that looks to be a fairly complex way of adding in the fragment. And there's a reason for it. All fragments are managed by a Fragment Manager. Unsurprising given the name here. And that's important. It needs to do that. Last time we talked about activities having a life cycle in terms of creating them, of starting them, of resuming them, of pausing them, of stopping them and destroying them. Fragments also have that exact same lifespan. They whatever the parent activity does, the child fragment will do the same. So the Fragment Manager helps tie these things together, that if the fragment or the activity is stopped, then we can help make sure that we also stop all of the fragments that are associated with it. And there can be more than one. So it's a sensible way of us as programmers not having to worry about it, of saying, okay, let's create a manager that will handle all of the boring things about looking after the fragments. So even though it makes it a little more complex here, it's actually there to help our life. We get the Fragment Manager. It gives us a type of, as you can see here, Fragment Manager. We begin a transaction, and we get a Fragment Transaction class coming out, and you actually can have different types of transactions. Here we are adding something into that transaction, and we want to add into this container. This is the view that the activity has. We want to add into that a new fragment. In this case it's called a placeholder fragment, called the type of fragment it is. That defines the transaction, and we then commit that transaction. We say, okay, we've set up all of the things we want to do. Fragment Manager, off you go. Can you do that, please? So it's quite compactly represented. This particular style of chaining these commands together, it's known as a fluent interface, or as method cascading, and it's quite a compact way of chaining together as opposed to having separate lines for them. If we look then at the Fragment class, so it's a static class. I want to modify this in a second. Within this here we have a constructor doesn't do anything, and we are overriding the onCreate view method. So in terms of other methods, let me move this up. if I were to check about what other on methods we have the normal onCreate bundle, we have the onDestroy. So all of the activity methods dealing with the various states are mirrored within the fragments. You might think, and I suppose it would make good sense if it was onCreate was the one we modify here, but it's actually onCreate View. Activities are the things that are responsible ultimately for managing how it is they look and for the bit of real estate that they're responsible for. Fragments reside within an activity, so they don't have necessarily the same amount of control. So onCreate View will be called, and into this we're going to pass in a layout inflator and a view group, which is the container within which this fragment will be added. So an activity actually can have a number of different fragments added to it. For us, for a game, we'll really just go for full screen fragments or full activity fragments. And you still have your save instance state. We want to return a view, so this is how this particular fragment will look. Now, if you think about it, here we're going to our resource file, we're going to the layout, and we're taking the fragment layout, which is simply that chunk of XML over here. Let me go back to our activity. And we want to turn that XML into some actual on-screen GUI objects that we can then manipulate. We use the inflator. The inflator is the thing that can take XML descriptions, which, for example, might say, okay, size it to contain the content, and take those descriptions and actually turn them into real meaningful objects that have a defined size that is right for whatever screen or interface we're running on. So that's what the inflator does. So we use the inflator to inflate this bunch of XML within the context of this particular container. And this gives us our view object. So at that point we've taken our XML and we've turned it into actually an actual object we can manipulate, something that corresponds to something real that's displayed on the screen. And we return that root view out. So fairly straightforward. This is the normal pattern in terms of either creating and adding in a fragment or defining how a fragment actually looks. Now there's a few things we want to do here. The first thing is adding in a static class. It says it's a placeholder. It's not really intended to be there a long time, and let's correct that now. So any of the fragments that we create, we want them to be in their own class. So we will go to the package. You could add it into a sub-package if you want, but we're going to go to our package, adding in a new class. And we'll say it's going to be my game fragment. We'll call it that, probably give it a better name. Superclass, we want this to be a type of fragment. Now, whenever you expand fragment, you'll see that there's the Android app one, but there's also an Android support one. That's if your game was supporting older versions of Android, then that's the one you would use. But we're not. We're only supporting modern versions, so we're going to pick this one. So that's our superclass, and we will create that. And it creates for us our game fragment, which is a type of fragment. Let us copy in the onCreate View method. And I'm going to paste that in. So you notice when I pasted it in, it automatically imported anything that this piece of code relies upon. So that's a nice little aspect. I save that. I get into my main activity now. I can get rid of this horrible static class, which I don't like. Now, it's complaining. Okay, placeholder fragment. It's not a placeholder fragment anymore. It is our game fragment. We can save it. And if we run it, it'll do exactly the same thing as it did before. In other words, display hello world. Now let's do something that is a little bit more pertinent to a game. To date, or so far, we have only looked at describing our interface using XML and then inflating that into actual objects that we can manipulate. When we are using our game, we will want a little bit more control. We will want to determine what exactly is seen on the screen, so we'll want to be able to draw things and from the context of this, to precisely describe what that view is and to have full control over that view. So we're not really going to want to use XML as our descriptor. But that's okay. So we have other options here. For this particular fragment, if I wanted to, I could just create an object straight out. So I could create, for example, a button called click me, new button. Now, anytime you create a button, you need to give it a context. So I'm creating here not through XML, but directly a button object that I can display as part of this view. Now, all of the components you connect have to have a context, the thing within which they belong. You could, and you would be right in thinking, okay, this button is really type of that fragment, but it has to be the display context. So the fragment itself belongs to the activity that is displayed. So for all of these things, what we are interested in getting is the activity as our context. So we're going to create our button called click me, and we'll get the activity that this fragment belongs within for the context for that button. And I could return it now as the view, and this would compile. If I wanted to, well, actually I do want to, click to, let's say, we could give it some text. So this is the text we want to have displayed on the button. So I could give it some text here. That's not a decent thing to do. Remember, we want to make sure that we're designing this here with flexibility in mind. So I go to my resource file. I could go to my string collection within that. Now show me the strings I have at the minute. Let me add in here my click me text. So this is going to be a resource which we can add in. So we'll do that now. It doesn't exist at the minute. It's going, can't find this. So we will go to our fragment. Sorry, not our fragment. Go to our values, into our strings. And let's add in a new string resource. And we'll call it click me. And please click me. And save that. Now, I define it in my string files. That means that the auto-generated resource file is going to pick this up. And it means that whenever I go back into my game fragment, it is now happy. It's not complaining about that. It says that, yes, this is a resource that I can find, that I know exists. So whenever we run this, the button will display with the click me please text. So at this point, we're specifying ourselves what we want and how we want it to look. We can also get and interact with it. So we could add in a click listener to that button. So it's set on click listener is the particular method, and if you can see, there's quite a few different listeners for hovering over it, for changing the focus, for if you have keys involved, or if you touch upon it. I don't use the on click listener. Now we need to give it what the listener is, and I'm going to use a new view on click listener. Do enter. This is an anonymous class that it creates for me, and inside this here I've got my override or override for the on click. So all views can notionally be clicked and can then listen to that click occurring. So I've got to add in what happens when we click on it. Now it is a view object V, but I happen to know I'm clicking on a button. So we can cast it to a button. We'll set the text. Okay, thank you. Yeah, not good. I really should have put this in the string resources, but I'll do it there for it. Now it's grumbling down here because the autocomplete added that in, but this is part of the method call. And we save it. So we've been successful. We've created our own component, not an XML. We're setting up how we want it to look. We're giving a click listener, so when something happens, we want some action to be taken, and we're returning it as the view for this. So if we were then to run this Android application, it fires up, and we now see that this grey bit here is our large click, please click me button. And if we were to click on that, we get thank you appearing on the other end. So it is as simple as that. It's a very simple thing that we've done. But that is the essence of the heart of any type of development that we will be doing. So final thing I want to show you here is the manifest. Manifest is very important. You can see within this, it contains things like the package, it has version information if you're having something that's iterating over time. It has information on the minimum and the target SDKs that this has been designed for. Then has some things about the label, the theme that it's using, the icon that it's using. So if I wanted to change my app name, I go into my strings collection and do so there. Now, importantly, it also lists the activities that this particular application can start. So I have my main activity. I've sent a few things that I'm saying is actually the one that should be launched. It's not just any old activity, it is the main activity to launch. And it's important that if, for example, I had 2 activities within my app, I would need to list both of them here. If I didn't list the second one here, then I would not be allowed to start that activity. And that comes into, you have to notionally publicize and make clear all of the things that your particular app does. Now, we will be returning to the manifest whenever we look at how we want to set up a game, because there's a few other things we want to put in by way of making sure, for example, the screen stays on the whole time and letting the user know that, and other related ones. So, just by way of recap, we looked at fragments, but more importantly, we looked at how we can create and modify elements within it. What we will be doing within a game is that we want to set up an app where we have full control over the screen, and the view, we want to have full control over that view, that we will be creating the view frequently, we will be drawing different images within that for whatever objects we have within our particular game, and we'll be displaying that on the screen. So it won't actually be any more in terms of the plumbing, it'll be exactly the same type of setup as we have here. We'll need to be mindful of the fact that we have a life cycle within which we are working. But these are all of the core elements of the Android process that we'll need within all of our games ourselves. So please make sure you're content with all of those, because they're the key things that we're going to have to rely upon and to build upon.